Hello, my name is Jay Carpenter. I am the founder of Desert Blockchain. And this evening, we're going to be talking about Zooko's triangle and why does that matter in the decentralized web? And why would it be important to square Zooko's triangle? So a little bit about who we are at Desert Blockchain. We have these sessions on the fourth Wednesday of every month, and they're for an hour and they cover various topics. And you can see some of the sessions we've had in the past on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you joining. Desert Blockchain is completely community supported via the Patreon account for signing up as a citizen for $10 per month. We appreciate your support. So we're going to be talking about Zooko's triangle in the context of a project that is being built called the dwebcamp directory. And it is a project that might very well be successful at squaring Zooko's triangle. And I'm going to talk about exactly what that means. But in the decentralized web space, there's a big gap between human-friendly addresses and naming and so forth, and machine-friendly addresses and identifiers. So why is that a problem? It's a problem because the adoption is slowed as long as we have these very complicated identifiers that we have to deal with as human beings that machines are great with, but human beings can't make any sense of them. And if there's the slightest bit off one of these machine-friendly addresses, it can be a big security issue. So in a nutshell, that's part of the reason that squaring Zooko's triangle, and I'll get into what Zooko's triangle is in a moment, but if we were able to square that, we were able to have human-friendly and machine-friendly addressing and naming work together almost seamlessly. That would be a big, big step forward in terms of security. And if it was able to work in a decentralized manner, that would be a big, big step forward. So let me go ahead and if you're watching on the YouTube live stream, feel free to put comments in the chat. I am monitoring that, and I will start screen sharing and walk through the presentation, which is linked below in the notes to this YouTube session. So this is a depiction of, on the left, we have Zooko's triangle, and this was postulated in 2001 by Zooko Wilcox. And I'm going to show you his original write-up or post about this. But basically, he said you can have two of three things in the decentralized web. You can have human meaningful naming, and it can be secure, but not decentralized, or you can have human meaningful naming and it's decentralized, but it's not secure, or you can have secure, decentralized constructs, but not human meaningful naming. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. And so there's an event coming up August 24th through the 28th, about 3 hours north of San Francisco, called DWeb 2022. In the middle, you see a map of the camp, and we are creating a directory on a separate website from dwebcamp.org. This is dwebcamp.directory, and this is an experiment in multiple dimensions. But one of those dimensions is, can we create a platform where you have human-friendly naming machine-friendly naming and addressing that's both decentralized and secure. So that's the essence of what we're going to be talking about this evening. And why does this matter? We talked about that just a little bit. And we're talking now about what is Zooko's triangle. Why hasn't this nut been cracked? Why hasn't this problem been solved? Because this is a huge, huge problem. A lot of really, really smart people have been working for years to come up with a mechanism or a scheme that can have human-friendly addressing, be decentralized, and be secure at the same time. And effectively, it hasn't happened. And I'm going to show one example that recently hit kind of a stopping point, or at least a big slowdown, let's say. And then we'll talk a little bit about, well, how could we square Zooko's triangle, and then what's next? And if we were able to do this, what would be the benefits of that? So this is a depiction of the dwebcamp.directory logo, and it just highlights that part of the intention of this platform, this experiment, this innovation is to indeed square Zooko's triangle and get human-friendly and machine-friendly addressing to work together in a decentralized and secure environment. So here is Zooko Wilcox's original write-up about this, and you can read through this at your leisure. But he talks about why this is sort of a fundamental axiom, if you will, that he had observed, and why it doesn't work, and some attempts that can lead you down a road with a dead end to it, a couple of ways to fall into a trap. And at the end, he says, hey, I'm not sure this is really true, but I would like the community to kind of play with it, poke at it, and see what you can come up with. Well, here is a little bit more discussion about that and some of the reasons this is important. And you can see that down in the solutions, a fellow named Aaron Schwartz came up with an approach that at least he deemed was a squaring of Zooko's triangle. And this is the post from Aaron Schwartz. And again, you can read through this. This is a bit technical, and read through it yourself, see what you think. But certainly Aaron Schwartz, who's no longer with us, was considered one of the real prodigies and leaders in the decentralized space. So take a look at that. More recently, there's been a multi-year effort by a group that by the name of Evernym, working with Sovereign and some other constructs, entities, and so forth, the whole consortium, primarily working with the W3C, which is a standard setting body that was launched by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented HTTP. But anyway, this video session, which was from November of 2021, talks about the progress they had made up until that point to create a standard of decentralized identifiers and DIDs, as they are called. And all the work they put into this, but at the very last towards the last part of the voting process, there were objections raised by the three of the largest browser vendors, Google, Apple, and Mozilla, basically disagreeing with this. So if you care to watch this session, about 55 minutes and 13 seconds into it, to 59 minutes and 20 seconds, you'll hear them talk about Zooko's triangle, why they chose to not make these identifiers particularly human-friendly, and then some of the other dimensions that they adopted in crafting the standard for the decentralized identifiers, DIDs. Well, and here's an elaboration on DIDs in Wikipedia and what they're intended to do, why they're important, and I can assure you that solving this issue is very important and would open up a huge amount of usability in the decentralized space. So what has happened since then? I'm going to mute for just a moment. Well, and this is a fairly recent development. As of July 19th, 2022, about 8 days before this particular session that you're in now or you're watching, they shifted the initiative in the W3C from an effort to create a standard to classifying it as a recommendation. So I haven't followed this initiative that closely, but this latest development, along with the session that I just pointed out, in my mind, puts a lot of headwind towards launching, having adoption of decentralized identifiers. And if you take a look at what does a decentralized identifier look like, here's an example: DID colon, double brackets, method, and then another colon, and then a string of numbers and digits and so forth. Not really human friendly. And they, again, it's my understanding that they tried to create constructs that would add a human friendliness to these DIDs and, you know, give it a more human usable form, or paired with a more human friendly naming scheme and so forth. But basically this is very much in the triangle that Zooko Wilcox laid out, which is that, you know, yes, maybe it's decentralized, yes, maybe it's secure, but is it human friendly? I don't think so. So here's a little something that I've looked at in the past, and it's called Girdles Theorem, and it's the incompleteness theorem. So for all of you that think that math is complete, and if you have something within the mathematical constructs that's true, then surely you can prove it. Well, this particular incompleteness theorem laid out that you can have something that's true, but it might not be provable. And this put the mathematics, the mathematics community or the mathematicians into a big tailspin, because it created some areas of incompleteness, uncertainty, and so forth. So why am I bringing this up? The reason I'm bringing it up is because the way Kurt Gödel was able to articulate this incompleteness and actually work with this this new realm of mathematics is he created something outside the realm of mathematics that allowed him to work with this incompleteness and so forth. And this hints of what I would say is a hint, or at least part of squaring Zooko's triangle. So it also highlights that there were a lot of really, really smart people for a really long time that were sort of stumped and baffled by this sort of flaw, or not necessarily a flaw, but this incongruity within the realm of mathematics. So as a kind of a sidelight, if you're really interested in taking a look at this and how vexing a problem like this can be, where you've got the smartest people in the world that are looking at this issue, or looking at an issue within something that seems like, well, this should be solvable pretty easily. Surely we can solve this. We just need to put a little more effort into it. Well, here's a documentary that was created by the British Broadcasting Corporation called Dangerous Knowledge. And it talks about how 4 of the most gifted mathematicians in the world were stumped by this and basically came to a rather tragic end because of this this problem that they either couldn't solve or was so disruptive to their foundations of their understanding of mathematics. And we're talking about Georg Cantor, Ludwig Boltzmann, Alan Turing, and finally Kurt Gödel, who was able to craft this construct that was able to provide some sense and insight into this vexing problem. And it's very much like Zooko's triangle and the problem that decentralized identity has faced, and many very smart people have tried to provide solutions to decentralized identity that was human friendly, or at least human usable, secure, and still decentralized. So this is just an example of how it's sometimes takes a radically different view or approach, where you have to step outside of the boundaries of the realm that you're grappling with, and all of a sudden the solution, or at least an understanding of the nature of the problem, will be forthcoming. So part of the solution set, in my view, in order to keep things decentralized in the realm that I'm going to suggest is a viable path forward, is how do you settle dispute resolution, or how do you settle disputes in a decentralized way? If 2 or more people are contesting a particular human-friendly address that maybe spells something that's really, really valuable, how are you going to solve that in a decentralized way without going to court and so forth? Well, for one thing, there has to be a market mechanism. Number two, in my view, you have to apply the tenets of what Professor Ronald Coase laid out in solving disputes in a decentralized way around radio spectrum. And in the late 50s, Professor Coase wrote a paper to the Federal Communications Commission that laid out an approach, a very novel approach to settling radio spectrum disputes, and it's called Coase Theorem, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics for that in 1991. So you can read about that, and actually the session we did on June 22nd, 2022, last month, we spent a lot of time talking about Coase Theorem and how it could apply to dispute resolution in a decentralized construct. So number one is, back to Girdles Theorem, is I think to square Zooko's triangle, you need something outside of the realm that you're trying to resolve. And number two, you need a market mechanism. And number three, you need, or at least what appears to be viable, is to apply Coase Theorem to the dispute resolution so that you don't have to turn to or rely upon a centralized entity to resolve the disputes and say, who's going to get this human-friendly name? How are we going to judge who has the rights to this address that's valuable? So here's a little bit more about Coase Theorem, some of the details of it. And by the way, Coase Theorem has some pretty specific requirements for it to work. Transaction costs have to be low. The items being disputed have to be very well defined. The property rights have to be defined, and basically there needs to be a market mechanism. So you can take a look at that. You can also review our last session last month, June 22nd. And here's a great podcast by a couple of law and economics professors talking about how property rights are generally viewed, who has the right to what. And they wrote this book called Mine, how we generally associate property rights, what are the customary ways to do that. And they do a lot of looking at Coase Theorem within this particular podcast, and I highly recommend it. So here is one of my favorite talks of all time, which is Milton Friedman, who also won the Nobel Prize in economics, professor in economics at the University of Chicago. But basically in about 2 minutes, Milton Friedman does a fantastic job, and he did not actually write this, by the way. He basically is just giving his rendition of it, but it's called iPencil, and it talks about how that pencil could not be made by one particular person, that it relies upon the dimensions and dynamics of the marketplace in order to bring the resources together to create something as simple, cheap, and common and everyday as a pencil. And this, I think, is a really important part about the strength and necessity of markets in decentralization, along with Coase Theorem, along with some of the directions of Girdles Theorem. All these come into play, in my view, for a squaring of Zooko's triangle. So Here's a little something that I wrote years ago in a similar quandary, conundrum, if you will, that the telecommunications industry was going through, which is called the end user identity paradox. And you can find this, a link to this in this presentation, and you can go through it. But basically, it highlights some of the key points that we just went over. One, you need a marketplace. Two, you need a way for parties to come together and resolve their disputes. And three, you need some way for these addresses, and in this case it was telephone numbers, but not all telephone numbers are the same. And you need a way for them to gravitate through some of these processes to the highest and best user. And this presentation also talks about the self-referential quandary that happens in the telephone numbering realm. And this touches upon one of the pitfalls, in my view, of the approach to DIDs and other decentralized identity, which is attestation. In my view, attestation will not solve many of the fundamental issues of decentralized identity, as well as what I know about Web of Trust, which also relies upon some attestation. I think that you have to have basically a contest, if you will, that's solved through the marketplace, that's solved through Coase Theorem, that also incorporates a duality of the addresses that I'll talk about in a minute, which is both human-friendly as well as machine-friendly. So that might be a little abstract, and I apologize for that, but in the sake of time, just keep that in mind, that what the DID community has experienced, and basically the part of the roadblock that they're facing, has been experienced before in the telecommunications in kind of a similar construct regarding identity and addressing and the allocation and governance of what at the time was telephone numbering. And here is what's called a request for comment, RFC, by the Internet Engineering Task Force that lays out the standards for something called electronic number mapping, or ENUM. And you can take a look at this, but you kind of have to trust me, because I've been through this in the telecom realm for a number of years. But what the telecoms wrestled with and eventually could not solve is very much akin to what has happened with the Evernym